Hello, everyone. We'll just give it a few minutes to allow everyone to come into the room. Very good. Well, I think the flow of people into the Zoom call is slowed down, so I think we will make a start. So welcome very much to this Zoom call around the Nahrain Network mini grant scheme. My name is Paul Collins. I'm a co-director for the Nahrain Network. Although I'm based at the British Museum, it's very much a UCL project. And I'm delighted to welcome onto the call here with us Dr. Mehiyar Kathem, who is the Deputy Director of the Nahrain Network Project. Mehiyar, I don't know whether you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. And I hope we can have a fruitful discussion. Professor Paul Collins will first introduce the mini grants, and then we can take, as Zainab has said in the chat, we can take the questions and answers. And if you do have a question as Professor Paul is speaking, you can just write it down in the chat, or you can ask a question at the end of this session. Thank you, Professor Paul.
Thank you very much indeed. And I should also mention, of course, that we have huge support here of our colleague Zainab Mahdi, who is managing the technological side of things. So thank you very much, Zainab. So before we begin taking your questions, I'll just share a short PowerPoint presentation as a reminder about this new project and research grant scheme. I hope everyone can see the screen now, but this is really just to remind you of some of the key elements of this grant award. It is, of course, a new scheme. This is going to be the first time that we are offering these mini grants. And the grants are up to £5,000 for what we're describing as a small research project. Now, those research projects can last anything up to 12 months, up to one full calendar year. And they're designed very much for Iraqi researchers who have a focus in history, heritage, and related subjects. So that's the key area we're interested in supporting, those areas where we have colleagues in Iraq who are focused very much on those areas. But the projects also should be developed to have useful contributions to Iraq through cultural, economic, environmental, or social aspects. So again, there's an important part of any project must be able to suggest that they will lead to improvements in some of those areas for Iraq. If you want to have a better understanding of the requirements for the grants, there's no better place to look than on YouTube, where you will find a complete breakdown of what's required, given by the director of the Nahrain Network, Professor Eleanor Robson. She explains in that YouTube video exactly what we are looking for in terms of applicants and the sorts of requirements for the grant. And the key element, another key area that the grant needs to meet is the 6 criteria, the 6 areas of real interest for the Nahrain network, which you see listed there. I won't read them out at this point, but they are available on our website and, as I say, on this YouTube video. So please do take some time to look at that, and it will explain in detail exactly what the grants are about. But I will, however, pause a little bit just to think about the sorts of research projects that we're thinking that these grants will help with. They are, as I say, a small research project, and they can be either a unique project, a standalone project in their own right, or you can be thinking about it as a project which will help develop a much larger project in the future. Perhaps a project that you might like to come back to the Nahrain network for funding on in a larger scale. They could also be, of course, a follow-on project, a project that develops some work that has already happened, and some of that may well have been projects that the Nahrain network has already funded, or you may have been a visiting scholar as part of the visiting scholarship scheme that the network supports. So those are strands of work which you might like to develop further through this scheme. You might like, for example, to work with an international institution, or indeed another expert in the field of history, cultural or related disciplines. Or indeed collaborate with colleagues within Iraq more broadly. So thinking about setting up a research network or a program of work. So this smaller grant might help you to develop a research question that enables you to think with colleagues in Iraq itself more broadly. But of course, the project could open up all sorts of new ways of thinking. But the key thing is that this needs to be a research project which has a research question which can be delivered with the funds available within 12 months. And that leads me to thinking about what the project can't support. And so we're not able to support through this grant scheme archaeological fieldwork. We can't support documentation or conservation of archaeological or other heritage sites, buildings, or collections. We can't support projects that work directly with children. And as I mentioned, we can't support projects that don't have a research question. In other words, we're looking in some way for the creation of new knowledge. The funding, the grant can't be to support training or your individual studies. It has to be about a research question which can be delivered in Iraq. And it can't be about funding either attendance or the delivery of an academic conference or any other type of conference. Again, it needs to be about a research question focused on history, cultural heritage, or the wider cultural landscape. So I hope that was a useful reminder of what the research grant is about. All this information is available on the Nahrain Network's website. So please, I encourage you to refer to that, particularly if you have further questions that we will be discussing as part of this webinar. But if you want further details, go back to the website and check that. I'd also emphasize that we are available to answer questions after the webinar by email. So again, if you find that you have further questions or the level of detail you need is more than we can deal with at this time, please do feel free to contact us by email. And again, the email address and details are all available on our website. So with that, I'll stop sharing and we can open up the floor to questions. And as Zainab put at the top of her list of questions, please do put those into the Q&A, use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And Dr. Mehiyar and I will do our best to provide you with guidance at this point, and then suggest other areas where you might like to find that information if need be. So let me start the conversation by looking first to Chang Farhan Tahir. Thank you so much for being our first question for the webinar. Right, hello, Chang. This is Chang Tahir. I'm an Iraqi, but I am doing my master's in economics and administration and arts and culture at the University in Venice. I'm dedicating my thesis to museum and heritage studies in KRI, and most of the key points of my research comply with the requirements of the project. Am I eligible to apply for this grant? Well, I would start by saying that, of course, the key one of the key requirements of the grant is to be an Iraqi researcher in Iraq, working on a project focused in Iraq with Iraqi colleagues or Iraqi institutions. You can, of course, work with international collaborators, but in a way we would need to understand better what your research question is, your focus, and how you intend to take that forward.
Wait.
Hello. Hi, how are you, Professor?
Thank you very much. No, it wasn't very clear, but please go ahead.
Yes, we are making videos about historical places in Iraq and making everything good for all historical in all cities in Iraq. We have videos, we have everything to save all places.
Okay, so one of the areas that the research grant isn't able to fund.
We are like creators video and like editing videos, record videos by camera, by everything. Yeah, we have everything. Translator with tourists come in Iraq. We can show you my videos how to search about historical place.
Sure. It sounds like a fascinating project.
Yes,
I think,
and we have populars in Iraq and the world. Some people know us about what we are doing.
So thank you very much indeed. I think, it sounds like a very interesting project. We aren't able to fund pure documentation projects. It is important
We
that...
can send you my links out for you if you want in this chat. You can choose.
I think, unfortunately, we won't have the opportunity to explore individual projects in detail on the webinar. I think what we can do is guide you towards understanding what we can support.
Yes.
And the projects need to have a research question rather than just being documenting heritage.
Yes, we know everything about historical places all ages in Iraq. We
Yeah.
are person making videos. We can show you if you want. I send you links. You can. We have every people's show us in Iraq. Mm. My
Yeah,
name's Ala Abdul Hussein. Ali, my friend, its name Ali Salim.
yeah, thank you very much indeed. I think what we will have to do is if you could send an email to the Nahrain network, we'll be
Yes.
able to have a conversation over email because although this sounds like a interesting activity,
We have channel YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
Yeah.
We have all programs. We have videos, all social medias. People know us.
Yeah, thank you very much
Okay.
indeed. Okay. Well, I think as I said, the mini grants are, I think probably we've lost him. Okay, very good. In which case let's go back to the questions. So there's a question now that's come through. Should the search only be in English? No, not at all. The research project, of course, can be conducted in the local languages of Iraq. It doesn't need to be limited to English. A question, I want to do research on the importance of historical and religious monuments in attracting tourists. Well, again, this is an area that's certainly really important, but we need to be thinking about the actual question you want to answer. And if there's a particular site, working with particular colleagues in Iraq around that site, with a clear sense of a question that can relate to tourism in the country, then that might well be an area we would want to fund. It's worth repeating that this is a small research grant, so the research question needs to be very targeted. You need to understand that you will need to find answers or recommendations or a report within a 12-month period. And so we would need to understand who you were working with and that they could manage the research grant from the financial side. But certainly questions around the future of tourism in Iraq through heritage studies is one area of interest. I have a question here. Are there any restrictions or preference in regard to research methods? No, we are very open to hearing about all sorts of different research methods. The Nahrain Network doesn't tell you how to do the research. We don't manage the project. We are interested in the research question and then how you would deliver that successfully on the ground with the finances available and within the time. But what we will need to see is a sensible plan to deliver the research question, but we will not be managing it, as it were, directly. So in terms of methodologies, in terms of methods, that's for you to lay out a plan to us, convince us that it is a methodology that is going to be successful in answering your research question, and then we will hopefully look to fund it. A question, I want to do research on the importance of historical and religious monuments in attracting tourists. Well, again, I think those sorts of questions are very important. And we would need to, again, think about whether the research question that you want to address it has a good methodology, the approach is adequate, that you have all the necessary permissions, and again, it can be achieved within the timescale. Does it need a host institution? And what is the role of the host institution? A very good question indeed. A host, you will need to have an institution that is able to manage the grant for you. So you'll either be, have some association with that institution or an affiliation with that institution, and they will then be able to manage the grant for you. But you can have partner institutions to help you deliver the project, but it is fundamental that you have some association with an institution that is able to hold and manage the grant for you. Question here about the unemployment problem in Iraq. I'm a professor of sociology. Is it possible to create a project to qualify and train students as social researchers to work in various organizations? Well, you could certainly develop, I would imagine, a research question around the possibilities of delivering or developing a project of that sort. Again, given the budget available and the time available, it would need to be a very focused project. Thinking about the ways in which you could work with partners across Iraq or within an area of Iraq, and the sort of program that could be developed as a result. But again, reminder that this does need to be focused very much on the history and culture of Iraq, and that it needs to show benefit to Iraq in the long run. So the possibility of increasing skills within the country, of course, could very well feed into that. So I think, again, we could develop this further through contact through email. So thinking about, again, specifically the research question and how you might deliver that. We can try and answer in more detail. But that feels as if with a dedicated research question, you might have an opportunity there. Can I submit the research in Arabic? Yes, absolutely. Please do submit your application in Arabic, and it will be considered exactly the same as an application in any other language. And a colleague here in the General Authority of Antiquities, completing his master's degree in the University of Bologna in Italy. Thinking about the neglect of Jewish homes in Iraq, especially in Diwaniyah, can it be a legitimate topic? Well, it certainly could be a focus for a research question. Again, it's unclear from what you're working on, what precisely it is you would be hoping to answer from that study, thinking about how it would, again, impact the wider community, what your focus exactly would be. But I think, a focus on the cultural heritage in that area would certainly be of interest, but we would need to see how focused your question was, who you would be working with, and how it would then be delivered over the time available. A colleague here working on the Halabja genocide memorial sites and the inappropriate management of these memorial sites, unbalanced distribution of these places, and then subject to destruction. Certainly, of course, those are areas which could well be the focus for a research question. Again, in a way, the challenge will be to come up with a question which addresses some of those concerns and thinks about how you might be able to answer that question. So who would you work with? the permissions that would be necessary to enable that. And again, thinking about the outcomes of that project, what would they be? How would they feed into a better organization or understanding of the way in which the current system works? So I think, again, narrowing down the idea into a research question which is manageable, and thinking about who you would work with in order to answer that question would be a key part of moving that forward. And that would need to be laid out very clearly on your application form. Dr. Mehiyar, do come in if you feel there's anything helpful to say here. I have a question here. Am I required to be a member of a local community organization inside Iraq, or can I have my own team? Well, you don't need to be a member of a local community, but you can certainly work with a local community if that's important in terms of addressing your research question. What will be important is that you are either a member of or have an association with an institution which undertakes research on history and culture of Iraq and the wider cultural landscape. And they are able to help you manage the grant and manage the scheme. So that's a key relationship important there. Can I write a project to complete one output? I did not complete it because it needed time and financial support of my project for the visiting scholars scheme. Indeed, Dilshad, is fantastic to have you on the call. Thank you. So one of the ways in which we want to help support future work that comes out of projects that have already been funded by the Nahrain Network is to enable small-scale projects that emerge out of the work that's already been funded. Now, that could be as a part of a major grant scheme, or indeed as a visiting scholar, where you've identified a research question that's emerged from it. It would be wonderful to be able to support a smaller project that emerges out of the existing work we've already funded. So for sure, that would be, please do be in contact with us, explain your focus of research, and then we can take that forward. I want to ask if this grant fund is a book publishing as a subject. It's about Iraqi old myths and how it affects the new community's collective memory. So the grant itself couldn't fund the publication of the book, but it could, of course, support a project which is thinking about the impact of the heritage on, say, a local community or within the context of a heritage site, and again, one might imagine a research project that is asking about that in the context of local community involvement or future tourism, for example. Regarding an institution being in charge of the fund, in my case, would my university be in charge of the grant? Well, you can work with international collaborators, but you really need to have a connection on the ground in Iraq in order to facilitate the project. Will the researcher be financially independent during the research stages? Or will the party he works with organize administrative and financial matters? Well, you will need an organization to help you manage the grant. So that's either working through an institution in Iraq or within a group, an NGO, for example, that will help you manage that grant. The research itself, of course, is not going to be necessarily determined by that institution. The question you ask and the way in which you deliver the research will be very much led by the lead researcher, but you will need an institution or some way in which the grant money can be managed and reported back to the Nahrain network, which is an important aspect of it, in terms of making sure it's being used correctly. No, in terms of research independence, that's very much left to the lead researcher and their team. If we search in a place that requires approvals, how do we get some approvals for the grant? Well, of course, if your research question does require you to get approvals, whether that's for access to a site or working with particular individuals or institutions, that would be very much part of the responsibility of the researcher or the research team. So they would build the research project within Iraq through those sorts of collaborations and working to get approvals. It is not something that Nahrain Network could do. As I say, we are not responsible. We don't want to be managing projects or determining the direction the research takes. We are about enabling it by approving a research project which has a good research question, that has good research outputs and clear deliverables, and that has a good plan in place which suggests that it will be possible to deliver it in the time available and with the money available. So that's what we want to see in the research application, is that clear, dedicated research question and then a plan for making that happen. Our initial research request, the application, is what we would describe as high level. We want to understand in very quite simple terms what you want to do and how you want to deliver it, and then a more complex, fuller description of the methodology and approaches and partners we could develop once we get there's a level of approval for that. So there is a process of being approved for the grant, but at this stage, we just want to see a good research question, a good methodology, and a suggestion that it's possible to deliver that within the time and at the budget available.
Paul, we have a couple of questions that may want to ask directly.
Very good.
We have Shireen Mohammed. If you'd like to go ahead, I can take some of, yeah, go ahead, Shireen Mohammed, if you can ask your question.
Hello.
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 Hi, please.
Thank you to give us this chance. My question is already on your chat and the professor answered about it. Sorry to my hand is still head. I don't have any question again.
Okay,
He
great.
answered about all my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have another Dr. Ardalan, if you would like to ask your question.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for your seminar. And I have two questions with one notification about the grant of Nahrain. And one question, it is possible to get a grant or doing a project about the cuneiform tablets in the Iraqi museums? It is my question. And my notification about your grants in Iraq, exactly in Iraqi Kurdistan. I see your grant is controlled by some persons in Iraqi Kurdistan, which always use this grant for herself or maybe for some persons near her. So how it is possible to control every project and every grant is for one person or some persons? Thank you very much.
I can answer the second question, Paul, if you would like to answer the first, which is about cuneiform tablets at the Iraq Museum.
So this grant can't be about, unfortunately, documentation or what one might describe as pure research, which is about individual study of a particular aspect of the past. This is very much about supporting wider questions around cultural heritage and history. And the key outcome of this research is about enabling Iraq in terms of its culture, heritage, supporting individuals more widely. So like with recording buildings or archaeological fieldwork, it's not possible for you to use this grant for small scale, dedicated, pure research. We are looking for projects that enable a better understanding of Iraq's culture and heritage more generally, which very often, of course, involves working with colleagues in cultural heritage sector, thinking about solutions for the future, but also a better understanding of the challenges to Iraq's culture and heritage today. So sadly, a project just documenting cuneiform tablets, or indeed the contents of cuneiform tablets, would not be suitable for this grant.
Dr. Ardalan, I actually follow your work. I understand that you're a lecturer in archaeology in Iraq. We take any of your observations and comments quite seriously. So if you'd like, you could email us and then we'll follow up with any of your questions. So I think that's the best place for answering any other questions you may have. And we'll continue this discussion. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? Ahmed Salah.
Yes. My question was already answered by the professor, but I might get some more detail. I don't know if you can hear me now.
Very clear. Yeah.
I cannot hear you. Let's see. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Perfect. Perfect. So my question was about the Jewish houses in my city in Diwania, and like I was thinking about not doing some kind of documentation, but my research question would be in the future, if I finish my MA in Bologna and I went back to my city, participate my job again at the SPAH. So dealing with the problem that as a historical site or historical houses, the Jewish houses have been left after the Jewish been like kicked out of the country, and these Jewish houses were left there, belong to the government, basically to the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage, but they are abandoned and they are collapsing. So how can I use this benefit to deal with this issue? Like to ask the question why these houses have been abandoned, or what can I do about it, or we can maybe do some kind of documentation about what's happening there, a small renovation project. I understand you are not funding this kind of projects, but I want to know regarding the Jewish houses in my city, how could it could be helpful for me to get the benefit, and what can I do with it? Thank you.
So if it's Jewish houses or any other type of cultural heritage building in Iraq, you could do a number of different activities. But like you said, we don't fund documentation nor conservation. But you could look at, for example, the oral history of these houses, the history of these buildings. That's the relationship people have, communities have to these cultural sites. So these are the type of work, this type of things that we fund. So rather than looking at, and there are other funders, by the way, that you may be interested in knowing or contacting that work on documentation and conservation. But there are a number of different ways you could approach it. And I think the best option for you is to read our website, read it well, and look at some of the other projects we have funded. And that should give you an idea of the type of projects that we fund, type of activities that are permissible within the framework of the Nahrain network. And of course, you can email us and we can try and support you and your other colleagues and anyone else here with some of their suggestions. But looking at a heritage house, you would need to think about history, society, looking at oral histories. So, you know, the stories and the narratives around the site or the cultural house. It could be an archaeological site also, or it could be a cultural building or a heritage house. So it could be Jewish or it could be any other site, it could be Ottoman. We don't really differentiate between these different groups and Iraq's history, but it's all within the remit of the Nahrain network. So it is within our remit and it is within the scope of our work, but you need to choose exactly how to approach this question rather than us telling you. You are more familiar with Diwaniyas, cultural houses and cultural buildings. I hope that's answered some of your questions, but I know it's not as straightforward, but I do encourage you to look at our previous projects and to email us also. But our previous projects can perhaps give you an understanding of how others have approached the same questions that you're looking at. Shall we look at Ali Taha? Let's take a question from Ali Taha Hussein.
Hello, Dr. Mehiyar. Hello, Professor Paul.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Very
Sorry.
clear, yes.
Hello, Professor. You already answered me about my question, but I have a little bit inquiry about how to develop a research after, of course, I get the grant or the committee sees it's fruitful for the teams of the network. Is it developed to be publishing research or I'm asking about the book previously. So, and my inquiry, to be specific, is what happened after the committee sees my research is fitting the sheet.
Did you catch that, Mehiyar? I'm sorry, I missed the
Yeah,
last.
So just to double check, Ali Taha, your question is about the nature of outputs in the project.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so you have to select the nature of outputs in the project. And again, I would encourage you to look at some of our other projects in the Nahrain network. And so there could be a number of different outputs that you could produce depending on the project that you design. So obviously you're going to submit a project, any project within the scope of the Nahrain network. Obviously you need to think about outputs, but before you even start to think about the outputs, you need to think about what are the key questions that you'd like to address in your research. And that should give you, and once you've discussed that, and I encourage you to discuss that with your colleagues, once you've asked those questions, what is the issue here with this heritage house or the nature of this cultural heritage issue in a certain part of Iraq? Once you've asked those questions and you've spent some time, and luckily you have lots of time, you have 2 months plus 1 week to think about these issues, because the application form is very straightforward. But it is straightforward, but you need to answer the questions in a way that addresses the project idea that you have. So I encourage you to spend sufficient time to think about the research problem, the research question. Once you have that, then you can start thinking about outputs. And we have a number of different outputs. It could be a research paper, it could be an exhibition, it could be a set of seminars and workshops. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, so I hope that's answered your question. So we have another Rabar, if you Abdul Wahid, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hello. Hello. Do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for your nice and brief talk, which very clearly delivered to us. Dear Professor Paul, I'm asking about the possibility of expanding your targets for, research groups in Iraq. As far as I know, you are mostly focused on cultural heritage, while there's, many research groups in Iraq who are working on environment and energy devices and linking these issues to each other in Iraq, which is, a very hot topic all over the world. So my question is is there any possibility for the future, like you are going to expand your scope of work rather than only focusing on cultural heritage? I mean, is there any possibility for that to happen in the future? So more people can benefit from your fund and grants?
So I would say we're obviously limited really in two ways by the funding that we have available, but also in a way our own expertise. So we are specialists in cultural heritage, in museums, in archives, in libraries, and history and archaeology. So we are focused very much on that area. However, I think you make a very important point. And the point, I think, is that many of the things you've just described do have an impact or are affected by the cultural heritage of Iraq. So an area, for example, we're keen to see research projects developed on is around things like climate change, which obviously have had an impact on Iraq's past and continue to do so today. But that can be understood through the cultural heritage of Iraq. So a research question which has cultural heritage at its heart could also overlap with some of those areas that you're describing. And building networks or connections or ways in which that might happen would be really very important and interesting ways of thinking about how cultural heritage can have a big impact and support Iraq for the future.
All right, as far as I understand from your answer, so there's a possibility to accept this kind of projects which links, like, let's say, a pure science, which is about, let's say, energy storage devices or renewable energy, and then link it to the environment and in some way to the cultural heritage, history, and future perspective of this field, actually. So is there any possibility for this kind of works? I mean, we are very keen to know our field of study, is fall within your scope. Because actually we have a large group here working on this field. We normally have like a large amount of publications every year, almost around 30 publications internationally. So we do really need this kind of grants, to keep our works improved and increase in numbers and in quality as well. So that's why I'm asking, actually, if there's like a chance to link these fields of knowledge to each other, and is it, to what extent it is accepted by your organization?
Yeah, I can answer some of these questions. So the people involved in the Nahrain network are all archaeologists, historians, Assyriologists, people who decipher, understand ancient languages of Iraq. And so it's very difficult to focus on areas that are not within our remit. And so, yes, of course, we've added the sixth aim, which Professor Paul mentioned early in the discussion, which is about the environment. But we can only look at the environment within our program through the field of cultural heritage. And so, because we cannot cover all of Iraq's subjects and topics and areas of importance. So if your project indeed is within the remit of and the scope of the cultural heritage, then that's something we can support. But if you're trying to reach out to something, maybe it's a bit too far away from the field of cultural heritage, then it will weaken your application. It will seem as if it's not entirely about cultural heritage. And the committee that will review these applications, these are all experts and they have previous experience in reviewing projects, and they will immediately see that this project is not really about cultural heritage. It's about this other thing, and it's been, this other thing is more prominent as a focus. So I encourage you to actually focus on cultural heritage as a main focus. And if it's not within your remit, if cultural heritage isn't something that you work on, then maybe the Nahrain network isn't really for you, because we often reject a lot of projects that are applying for the Nahrain network that are not at all about cultural heritage. And I do understand that funds are difficult in Iraq to secure for all the other things that are being neglected in the country, the environment, and sociology in general, even history, is quite neglected. And so there's only so much we can offer. And I hope that's answered your question. But yes, again, I encourage for someone who isn't someone in the field of cultural heritage not to apply for the Nahrain network, because it's very, very difficult. Unless you have a partner who actually maybe you can bring in different expertise, someone who's cultural heritage, maybe an environmentalist, then you can start to work together, or an engineer and a cultural heritage expert, then that can come together. But if everyone in the project is an environmental engineer and they don't really know much about cultural heritage, then it's less likely to be accepted as a project. I hope that's answered your question. Let's take a question from Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Mehiyar. Good evening, everyone. Actually, I don't have a question, but I have a short comment just to explain something. So I think here in Iraq, most people, research people, focus on the quantitative approach, quantitative strategy rather than qualitative strategy. So most people know about hypothesis, how to design hypothesis, but not research question. So we can say that people ask about the area of research, but rather than the research question and how to bridge the gap on this research question, or that reflect this research question. So that's why I see that we don't think carefully about how to design research question, how to find good research question. Just I want to say that I'm happy to help anyone that needs any help in this regard. So please, just anyone from this group that attend today or other people, I will be happy to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ahmed. That's very welcome.
Let me join Dr. Mehiyar in thanking you, Dr. Ahmed. That's very generous and yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Did we have a question from Rawa Karim?
الو مرحبا.
Hello, مرحبا.
Can I speak English or Arabic?
You can speak in English.
Yes, I am from Museum Suleimani. I have a question about we have many houses in Suleimani for religion Jewish. I want to make a research about how they pray, how they make it. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand your question because I've seen it written also.
Yes. Yes.
You are welcome. You're welcome to apply regarding any heritage houses, not just Jewish, but any heritage houses in Iraq, to the Nahrain network. And if indeed if it's within the scope of the and I would encourage you to look at our application form And I don't know if you have looked at it, but look at the website and you can see whether your project is eligible and how to design your project, give you some information about the kind of things we support. So yes, we can support Jewish or non-Jewish, any type of heritage houses. But like Paul has said, we cannot fund documentation and conservation, but we can fund research and some of the things that have been discussed. We discussed this regarding Diwania. So it's the same reply to you regarding Jewish houses in Sulaimania. I hope that's answered your question. Go ahead, Zina.
Yeah, I had a question. Thank you so much. I had plenty of questions and I got answer for most of it. But my other question is, should the institution who supports the researcher be working in the field of history and heritage, or it doesn't matter?
So I think they don't have to be an institution which works with history and heritage as their main activity, as it were. So it could be a university with lots of different departments. But if they are able to support the lead researcher by managing the grant and are providing support in terms of producing the reports and outputs, then that is certainly possible. Of course, you will need, as a lead researcher, to be working with colleagues or other institutions that do have the necessary expertise to deliver the project. So there are sort of two separate things here. You could be based in an institution that is willing to support the project through managing the grant, but the expertise you would need to build through partnerships or through other colleagues.
Great. I think we should, Paul, let's take one. There's just the questions that are written, and then we'll wrap up. Just some of the questions that have been typed. Yeah.
Okay, let me return back to the Q&A then. So I filled out a form on conducting and designing research in the humanities, but I haven't received an answer yet. Well, if you've applied for or put an application in for the mini grant, the closing date is not for another 2 months, at which point, of course, all the grants will be evaluated, and then we will go through the process of selecting the strongest applications and letting people know the decision on those. So if you have already submitted an application, then it is in the process, and we will come to it eventually in May. Do you fund research for enhancing cultural heritage interpretation? So I think this is an interesting question. Again, it depends what you mean by enhancing. We wouldn't be able to support, say, the publication of information panels or books or guidebooks or anything of that sort. But what we could fund are questions around how sites, places are understood by either local communities or other groups.
The galleries are now closed.
Or research questions around how it would be possible to improve the interpretation and the understanding of the history of Iraq, again, by working with local groups or through working with colleagues in relevant institutions. So again, I think probably we would need to understand a little bit more about what you meant by your question. So please do be in contact by email, and we'll try and help further there. And then one other question here. What if the institution I work for doesn't have experience in hosting grants? How could this be processed? Well, it is important, of course, that you do have an institution or some mechanism for managing the grant. And that means, again, reaching out to through colleagues or through institutions, which might be an NGO, for example, as much as a university, to find a partner who will be able to manage the grant for the research project. And I think there the questions have come to an end. Very grateful indeed to everybody who has joined us for this webinar. We have, of course, I'm sure, only managed to answer a few of the questions that are out there. So again, I would encourage everybody who either we haven't had the opportunity to speak to, or indeed if other questions emerge, for you to look at the Nahrain Network website, work through that in detail. You will be able to see the sorts of projects we fund there. But if you can't find the answer from the website, then please do be in contact by email, and we will endeavour to help you to understand exactly what it is we need from a good research application. And again, I refer you back to the YouTube video by Professor Eleanor Robson, who explains very clearly exactly what is required from a research application. So again, thank you very much indeed from me for your attention, and we look forward very much to reading your applications and deciding on the successful applicants. Thank you very much.